Okay, we are live in this session 2A, Musicians and Professional Development. Thanks for joining us. And in this session, we have three speakers. We'll start with Jane Booth, who is a coaching lead and senior coaching associate, and Trudy Wright, who is independent consultant and Guildhall coaching associate. We also have Jenny McClay, who is a clarinet soloist, recitalist, orchestral player, chamber musician, pedagogue, and a blogger. And the latter is relevant to her presentation, I think. And we also have Christa de Wit, who is from the research group Lifelong Learning in Music at the Prins Claus Conservatoire, Hanse University of Applied Sciences in Groningen. So, welcome all. And without further ado, I give the floor to Jane and Trudy for their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm just going to pull up our PowerPoint and check that that we're sharing this the way. There we go. So thank you so much. Jenny is a fellow clarinet player. It's lovely to be in the room with another single reed performer. Anyway, back to our presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Trudy and I are really pleased to be joining you at this conference. Orchestral principals receive no formal training for the non-musical parts of their roles. This can result in a hit and miss approach in their non-musical leadership, which in turn can have a detrimental impact on orchestral life and culture. Wide management experience and related theories suggest that these skills can be learned. Coaching skills training increases awareness of a person's behaviours and the behaviours of others, and creates space for open and compassionate dialogue. It helps individuals be consciously intentional in their behaviour, helps organisations redefine their cultures, helps people see their own blind spots and biases, and provides the tools and confidence to bring about the cultural changes many want to see.
Could these skills be a welcome addition to an orchestral player's toolkit? We surveyed a cross-section of principal and section players from the UK. We asked section players, what expectations do you have of section principals? Here's what they said. Impeccable playing, having a sense of humour, a go-between, being responsible for morale, inclusion, support. Section players identified a desire for clarity and respect, the most frequently stated attributes. Section players want their principal players to be clear in demonstrating and communicating. Sometimes leaders are unaware of how much confusion can arise through their lack of clarity. Section players said that respect works two ways and is an important component of a positive working environment. Respect from tutti to leader and vice versa goes a long way to make things successful for me.
Principal players identified the need for the following leadership qualities. There were human qualities, management qualities, and artistic qualities. Many of each of those categories. The long list of expectations from both principals and section players are largely unspoken and may never have been surfaced before we conducted our research in 2019. A major internal conflict for principal players was highlighted, and it resonated strongly for us. On the one hand, a section player said, "There's little to no leadership training in most orchestras, and most leaders are in their positions because they play their instruments well. I think helping musicians be better leaders is vital. We currently just hope that they have the personalities to do the job." And crucially, a principal player said, Leadership includes caring for your colleagues and their personal predicaments, also being firm in what you believe and having the courage to disagree. I'm not very good at that. I never want to be upset or upset others, as my playing might pay the price. That's what matters to me most at the end of the day. So principal players tell us they worry that being pulled into the non-musical leadership issues without appropriate training could have a negative impact on their performance. So we asked them what support do they currently receive in their roles. 50% of them said none. And we asked principal players how important it is to develop leadership skills for their roles. 9 out of 10 said these skills are needed.
Our research revealed 3 key findings. Firstly, all players have a desire for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Secondly, demands on principal players are extremely high. They constantly experience the push and pull of delivering artistic excellence and non-musical leadership. And thirdly, orchestral musicians want to develop more skillful communication, a more positive team culture, and a stronger sense of well-being. Some of the theoretical frameworks that support our findings include self-determination theory. The American psychologists Deci and Ryan identified 3 significant human psychological needs: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Martin Seligman's work in positive psychology recognizes that people and organizations learn and grow most effectively when they focus on their strengths and what works well. When people use skills and competencies effectively, they create positive emotions, releasing happy biochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Barbara Fredrickson's Broaden and Build theory of positive emotions demonstrates scientifically that positive emotions widen our cognitive capacity, increasing our physical, social, and intellectual abilities. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow builds on positive psychology, showing how effortless and exhilarating it can be to concentrate wholeheartedly on a task that uses our strengths and talents. And neuroscience, which shows how different parts of our brains work, how we can consciously change our behaviors, better regulate our emotions, and develop strategies to manage ourselves through stressful and challenging situations.
From our research findings, we devised and delivered a course in non-musical leadership skills, and we ran a pilot in November. Leaders on and off stage drew principal players from 6 different UK orchestras. The course addresses the needs of principal players and section players. It educates about human behaviour, raising awareness of and drawing on science around brain function and emotional intelligence. It demonstrates and models alternative language and communication skills. And it offers exercises on real issues to practice building new skills and habits. Our course helps musicians to co-create the environment they want and to develop the skills necessary to maintain it.
So I'm just going to pick up for Jane here because clearly something's going on. I'm sure she'll come back when she can. So in sharing their experiences, they learn from each other and recognize they are no longer alone in the challenges they face on and off the platform. Most crucially, it empowers musicians to believe that cultural change is possible. And this new mindset enables all musicians to experience being at their best in the moments when it matters most. Here's some feedback that we've received for the course. Leaders on Stage was an eye-opener. It helped structure my thoughts around what excellent orchestral leadership is. It gave me a variety of tools to help deal with sticky situations, from interpersonal relations to fostering a better overall working atmosphere. It also showed me that issues I grapple with are by no means mine alone. And this was the first time I ever had the chance to air some of these with others in similar positions. We've also delivered a shorter workshop, The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations, 2 half days involving both principal and section players from the same orchestra. Feedback was also positive. This is a wonderful workshop for any orchestral musicians. It gives tried and tested tools to approach difficult conversations. It raises awareness, understanding, and ability, and enhances group dynamics no end. This group has since met fortnightly to embed and grow their new skills to bring cultural change to their orchestra. So, our next steps. We will deliver The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations for a North American orchestra in May, and leaders on and off stage will run in June. We're building a community of best practice for the orchestral sector through regular post-course surgeries. And we'll be assessing the impact of this work on orchestras and individuals through a longitudinal research project. Additionally, in the autumn, we plan a further investigation with management and principal players, looking at mutual expectations, recruitment, retention, and professional development. Thank you. I'm sorry we lost Jane.
Thanks a lot, Trudy. And yeah, let's hope Jane can join us again. That was very interesting. I would like to see questions if there are any in the chat. Right now, I don't see any questions in the chat. So that means that maybe I can have a question. So what I really like about your presentation and approach is that you basically point out this difference between, on the one hand, being highly trained in all sorts of musical skills and trying to be an excellent performer, while at the same time, if you have to perform, let's say, in a different register, more socially with colleagues, and then musicians often lack these skills. That's how I would summarize your approach. And what I would be interested in, so if you could say a bit more about, let's say, examples from your coaching practice. So for instance, you mentioned this workshop, Art and Science of Difficult Situations. How can this workshop give us an idea of how musicians cope with these difficult situations for leaders? Can you give some examples from that workshop?
Jane, do you want to? You're back.
Yes, can you hear me?
Which is great. Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to say a little bit about the workshop?
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want me to?
So, there's a number of areas around emotional intelligence that help us to understand why it is that in the moment when something's stressful, we often hit the fight or flight button, and that means that we're not responding from our best possible self. As soon as an emotion is heightened, then there are all sorts of chemical changes that happen in the body, and primarily we're not really in touch with our thinking, the thinking part of our brain. You know, when somebody says, I wasn't thinking, that's absolutely true, because as soon as the fight or flight is triggered, that part of the brain is switched off. The reptilian brain takes over and overrides everything that we know about the best person that we can be. And so all of these responses, some people call it an amygdala hijack, create tension and stress and an emotional response which isn't helpful to a difficult situation. And principal players find themselves, with these interlocutor positions between perhaps the conductor, the director, or between the management and the players. And this stressful situation is happening at a time when they also need to be ready to give their best as artists. I've played, I can remember being at a very high profile concert hall. I had 4 clarinets in my hand. I was about to go on stage and play principal clarinet in Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. I was playing on period instruments. It's another level of demand that period instruments require. And a member of the orchestra was upset at a decision that had been taken around some other part of the work and shouted at me just before that concert started. And I was in a terrible, terrible state. I had to go on stage and be my best. And it takes the most enormous effort to be able to cope in that situation. It happens to people often because everybody is in a state of heightened awareness. And so giving people skills and allowing them space to practice a new way of responding and helping the whole community to understand that we can do this work better. We can work better together if we increase our awareness and our knowledge around the human issues that we're facing. Then the whole atmosphere around the orchestra can change. Trudy, you might have something else to say.
No, I mean, I think this is it. I think, I've toured orchestras for 25 years and I found, many, many different orchestras all over the world. And the thing that I noticed in orchestral settings was that sometimes there were some real tensions between desk partners or tensions between sections. And there didn't seem to be any infrastructure or mechanism to respond to this. And, these are musicians on tour in a stressful situation away from their families and their support systems, and they're expected to go on and give their best when it mattered. And actually, they're, in a sense, that we're not equipping our musicians with the tools that they need in order to manage those situations in the best way. So, the point of the Art and Science of Difficult Conversations is actually to create real awareness around our own behaviours and understanding of other people's behaviours and skills and tools to enable us to manage all of that in a much more constructive way.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And again, if there are any questions, please send them in the chat. Just one last question from my side. You're talking about these exercises almost. Could you give an example of such an exercise? So what is it that people then actually practically can practice?
Yeah, well, 7% of human communication is in the language. The rest of human communication is in the tone, the body language, and all of the other things that surround. And as musicians, we have highly tuned ears. We have been training for decades and practicing and working with others. And we have thousands and thousands of hours of practicing, honing our listening skills for the musical environment. But honing our listening skills for the human environment is something we haven't talked about. And when we start to do that, we realize just how much other information there is that we are giving out. If I'm worked up and stressed, it will show. And other people will pick it up. However attuned they are to that, it will impact our interaction. And so learning about building rapport and how much we need to commit to building rapport with our colleagues so that we can then have conversations. So listening skills, but in a very broad term, about applying the listening skills musicians already have, but to this human interaction. And also, I think there's a really big part that we need to pay attention to today, which is respecting all aspects of diversity. So psychological diversity is a very, very big factor in this work, but all other aspects of diversity, recognizing we all come with our preferences and our biases, and we can only learn from people who have different preferences and biases. We can only learn from others. So bringing curiosity and letting go of judgment is one of the big things that takes a huge amount of practice, actually. We're good at practicing, so let's practice this as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. So practicing is definitely part of the profession of being a musician. And yeah, this is a different type of practice that you also need. At the moment, we are doing a project here with the South Netherlands Philharmonic, the Learning Orchestra, where it's about the question, how does an orchestra learn, well, not just the music that they perform, but also other aspects, how they communicate to audiences, how they organize their internal organization. But this is definitely something that could also be on the agenda for that project. So I think we'll come back to you about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, and we continue with the presentation of Jenny McClay, the rise of the individual leveraging social currency branding in the future of classical music. Jenny, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my presentation. And I will be discussing just what you particularly, because I think social media is so crucial for the future of classical music, and I know that it has certainly developed a lot of my career. So I do have a blog, Jenny Clarinet, and it's been read in over 170 countries. And I really think social media, the internet, and utilizing all the technologies available is the future of classical music. So I will be talking about that today. Let's start out by describing what social currency is. So according to Forbes, social currency is a way to leverage the way people interact, buy, sell, and promote on social media to ultimately grow your brand. So as a musician, composer, any artist, your personal brand is your online reputation. Your website, your social media platforms, anything that you have online, that becomes your personal brand. And the brand will be your style, your performance, your pedagogy, all of your music philosophies you can share with people from around the world. And you can build social currency and personal branding by creating a strong online presence. So for me, is through social media and online presence. And I think this is so crucial for musicians because it gives them direct control of connecting with their audience. Before, and we'll talk about this soon, the marketing and the connecting with the audience wasn't necessarily the individual's job. It was the job of the orchestra, of the manager, or someone else. But now artists have direct access to what they choose to share with their audiences. And this is so important because having a higher social currency can lead to more performances, larger audiences, and just more opportunities available for creative industries. So let's talk about the role of social media in classical music today. And I think it's very interesting to note that both music and social media lead to creating connections. I think one of the main goals of music is to create connections with other people, other musicians, and your audience, as well as a similar goal for social media. The goal of social media is to create connections with maybe your family, your friends, people that you follow, brands that you want to learn more about. So they both have very similar goals. And the role of social media for music is to allow audiences to experience the formerly private world of the elusive classical musician. And this is very interesting to me because historically, society doesn't know a lot about the daily goings on for classical musicians. If you were to attend a concert, you might see someone go on stage, play a beautiful melody, and then walk off stage, but you would be none the wiser to what they're thinking, how they practice, or anything that's going on besides their performances. So social media allows the artist to take control of the narrative and share what they want to with an international audience. Social media helps to also develop artists' narratives. So like I said before, they can just share whatever they deem important to their audience. as well as sharing their artistic or musical missions, and it allows them to stand out as unique individuals apart from orchestras and other ensembles. So even musicians that are part of a symphony orchestra or a quartet or chamber ensemble, they still have the opportunity to have an individual voice as well as the voice of the ensemble of which they partake. And I've heard this excuse a lot. Social media is just a waste of time. I don't have time for social media. Surely it can't really help the careers of musicians. But I just don't think that's true. And the reason for that is because it depends on how you use social media. Historically, I think it would be silly to assume that musicians would not have utilized the powers of technology and social media. I've included pictures of Paganini and Liszt, two people who I think would really have benefited from the use of social media, these virtuosi that would have loved social media to sell tickets to even more concerts. Others could include Stravinsky or Wagner, who created his very own festival. Mozart's dad, when he was touring his son around the world or around Europe, then I think all of them would have loved to have something like social media just to promote what they were trying to accomplish to as many people as possible. So even though it is new technology, I don't think historically most musicians, composers, or any of the other artists would have balked too much at using social media. So using social media for the greater good, there are so many benefits to using social media. It's not just a mindless waster of time. It can help to celebrate diversity in classical music, as well as making music and information much more accessible. It could bring attention to inequality, to advocate for social justice, and use music to directly enact change with audiences. Something in the clarinet community that has since spread to the international world, I believe, is last summer after the murder of George Floyd, Anthony McGill, who is the principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, played America the Beautiful in a minor key, and he posted this simple melody on social media, and it went viral because he was protesting the social injustice that he was seeing, and he was interviewed, and this was a really great way to use social media and classical music just to share your philosophies on anything, on injustice, on teaching philosophies, on current events, and anything. So this is, I think, a really great example to show the powers of using social media and combining that with your classical music training to use it for the greater good. So that's just one example of many. There are so many infinite examples of how social media can help the world that I think the possibilities are infinite. So let's talk about creating personal connections through social media, because I know this is a very real concern where it seems overwhelming and a lot of it seems very insincere. But if used correctly, social media can strengthen the relationship between the creator and the consumer. I know the people that I follow on social media, many of whom I've never met before, I feel like I know them because they share their practice routine, they share their teaching philosophies, they share their tour schedule, and a lot of other information I wouldn't have access to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We would not have the same information. So it's a much more personal connection that you can create with your fellow musicians and your audience using social media. This is also a great way to collaborate with future donors, commissions, performances, partnerships, and other opportunities you can create using social media. I know one example that I've used personally is, especially this last year, I've participated in many multi-track projects with people from around the world, and I met all of these people through social media. So that's just a great way to bring people together, whether or not you have previously met them in real life. So let's look towards the future and how social media can impact that. How can musicians leverage social currency to be more directly involved in shaping the future of classical music? Musicians can interact with a wider network of musicians, composers, and other collaborators. They can introduce music and musical ideas with an international audience. You can break down cultural barriers and diversify classical music. And you can make classical music more accessible using social media and other online tools. So like I said, these are just a few of the ideas that I was able to think of. The possibilities are really infinite for using social media and just technology in general to directly impact a better future of classical music. And social media really helps with music education. This is crucial, I think, for the future of classical music, because the future rests upon the children of today who are learning music. And social media is a non-traditional resource in which many children and other music students are looking to learn more about their craft. So social media can be used to crowdsource. If you do use social media, I'm sure you've all seen on forums, where can I find this edition of the Mozart Concerto? Where can I find a good fingering for this piece, or bowings, or anything like that? So crowdsourcing information. On Instagram, I have several students that have created practice grams where they just post videos every day of themselves practicing, and they're able to receive mostly constructive criticism from others around the world. There are Ask Me Anything style tutorials where some people will let their audience ask them questions about anything that they want. Students today have access to infinite amounts more resources and information than generations past. And people today are much more likely to trust influencers, family, friends, and followers than they are big brands, because there's more of a personal connection. So how can we use social currency and social media to create a better future for classical musicians? We can start out by making resources and information more accessible. So this could be creating blog posts, on organizing online conferences like this one, doing Zoom interviews, tutorials, articles, and any to help train the next generation of musicians. You can use social media to connect with a larger network. You are no longer limited to your immediate geographical area. You can reach anyone in the world that has internet access. You can collaborate with others from a wider geographical region. You can learn about new pieces that we might not have yet discovered. You can foster interdisciplinary collaborations, and you can also diversify the repertoire. So like I said, the possibilities are really infinite. The only limit is your own imagination and how you choose to use social media, social currency, and personal branding to impact the future of classical music. And it is up to us to change the world one note at a time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. It's a wonderful presentation. And maybe the others can switch on the cameras. And again, I ask participants, delegates, to ask questions through the chat, which I do not see at the moment. So I would have a question for Jenny. And maybe, yeah, it's a bit of a strange question, because you are making this point about the Liszt and Paganini, and what would have happened if they would have had social media. So basically, what could we add to their practice, which is of course a bit Whiggish in a way. Can you turn it around? So are there things that we could learn from the way they connected to their audiences?
Absolutely. I think in a lot of ways, Paganini, Liszt, and all of the other 19th century virtuosi were the first rock stars. They had such a cult following that we can learn a lot about personal branding. Paganini was known as the devil's violinist, and he would rip strings off of his violin and just create these impossible scenarios. And I don't necessarily think we have to do that, but there was a level of excitement to the performances, and it wasn't as removed or distant as some classical events could potentially be. So there is more of a personal connection. I think we could learn a lot from all of these musicians.
Yeah. And so you're saying this personal connection is really important for musicians today. I think it makes total sense to me, since we are communicating more and more through social media. At the same time, maybe not everyone feels as much at ease doing so, because in a way it's also inviting people into your personal sphere and life. And it strikes me that in the previous presentation we were talking about skills. How do you communicate in stressful situations? And that's something that musicians have to learn in addition to their playing their instruments. But here you have another set of skills that you have to learn. So basically, yeah, is it something, yeah, or what could you advise musicians if they are somewhat hesitant in following your advice?
I would say the biggest piece of advice would be to find your medium. I know for me that I've always wanted to be a writer even before I ever touched a clarinet. And so that's why I gravitated towards the blog, is I enjoy writing. I don't know much about video editing, so that's why I don't do YouTube videos. So to really go for your strengths instead of trying to improve your weaknesses, think about what you do well, maybe the platforms that you already use. But for everything else, it's YouTube. I didn't know the first thing about web design, and I spent hours on YouTube typing in all of the questions I had. And like I said, the resources are infinite. So what you don't know, if you have the determination and the time, then the internet has the answer. So everything is at our availability to use.
Yeah, definitely. So I have another question, but maybe some of the other panel members would like to join in.
Sorry, please, Jenny.
Jenny, I wonder if you feel that there might be any dangers of using this medium. What might what sort of caution might, especially young artists, need to exercise when they're dipping their toes into different social media channels?
I think the biggest now is just learning how to differentiate between good information and bad information. I've seen information on Instagram to bathe your clarinet, to submerge it in water for wooden clarinets, or things that are just absolutely false. And so if someone is younger or just starting out, they might not know the difference between accurate or inaccurate, or opinion versus fact. So training students how to mindfully consume the content that's out there. As well as another big issue is just dealing with burnout, feeling like you're performing your life instead of living your life, dealing with mean comments sometimes. I think we've all had that experience online. That's a very real concern. In a way, I think that's an extension of maybe criticisms that we would have had previously, but I think people are much more bold on the internet because there is this air of being anonymous, even though that's not always true. So just developing a thick skin. And then also setting boundaries and trying to determine what you choose to share. It doesn't have to be everything, but creating healthy boundaries between what you share and what you decide to keep private.
Yeah, Krista, did you have a question?
Well, it was more about the implications for education then. I mean, there's a lot of, if you consider this from the perspective of professional and personal marketing and branding, how to be, for example, culturally sensitive in that if you have a very international pool of students.
I would say do your research as much as possible. Try to go to accurate information, but also don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong, and to constantly learn, and never to assume that you're always right, but to listen just as much as you are talking, trying to do better every single day. Nobody is perfect, but I think the difference between the people that try are that they are listening to their audience instead of talking at their audience. It's a conversation.
Yeah. Jenny, we can't see you. You switched off your camera.
No, let me turn it off and back on again. That seems to do the trick.
Yeah,
But we can hear you. So
okay.
I would have a last, a sort of final question. Since you use social media a lot, did it change you as a musician? I mean, especially in terms of the interaction with your audience, in a sense. So, because that's, I think, what makes social media so interesting compared to the 19th century model of the orchestra playing on stage quite anonymously. So basically no real interaction during the concert. So can you say something about that?
Absolutely. I think social media changed my life in such a positive way. I really consider the audience. I don't even like using that word necessarily, because my social media audience, a lot of them are my friends, and I think it's just given me so many more opportunities. And I've been able to meet people when I travel. If I post about where I am, then I usually have messages from musicians that live there wanting to meet or to collaborate, or just these wonderful opportunities. And I think it's just such a powerful tool to make the large world feel a lot smaller and more connected. So I think there are a few negatives, but I think it's overwhelmingly positive, just if you examine it from an opportunity standpoint.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Jenny. It's a great topic and presentation, and very topical also. But let's move to our next speaker, Christa de Wit from Klaus Conservatorium in Groningen. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd first like to just paste a video on the chat, which I will later during my presentation ask you to view due to a little bit of a technical difficulty. And this is the way where you can view this video, which is part of my presentation. So what I'm going to present to you is about the professional development of classical musicians outside the context of concert halls and conservatoires, actually. So let me just start sharing. A new professional practice called Meaningful Music in Healthcare, or MIMIC in short, was developed by the research group Lifelong Learning in Music at the Prins Claus Conservatorium in Groningen in the Netherlands. And this happened in collaboration with the Department of Surgery at the University Medical Center Groningen in 2015 and 2017. And in this interdisciplinary research towards the new contextually well-informed artistic practice in healthcare and in hospital, to be exact, it included three perspectives: the patient's well-being, the well-being of care professionals, and musicians' professionalization, as well as education for novice musicians in a new training module. The research group Lifelong Learning in Music explores the different roles that musicians can take in the ever-changing professional field. As you know, it is less and less typical that professional musicians hold only one position of work, and instead they develop so-called portfolio careers, which requires responsiveness, adaptation, and innovative outlook. And one of the new challenges for musicians is to create and execute artistic work in the wider community. Musicians have established creative work in various contexts that include, that could be described as engaging with new audiences. And one of the quickly emerging professional practices or profiles is in the field of music and healthcare. Increasing numbers of musicians are responding to the tensions on the healthcare sector, such as aging, dementia, increase of illness, staff burnout, and finding also new strands of employment for themselves. And participatory music practices continue to emerge increasingly in healthcare, which also reflects on educational programs in various institutes of higher education worldwide, especially in Europe as well. So in the MIMIC practice, professional musicians with classical higher music education backgrounds work in hospital wards, playing live music for patients and healthcare professionals in week-long projects. Various approaches of person-centered music making are utilized, and this means playing arrangements of carefully selected repertoire that can be tailor-made for the needs of the participants, and this repertoire accumulates through the experience and initiatives from patients, nurses, and the musicians themselves. And second, the musicians make improvised pieces of music in the moment with themes arising from the patient's life world, such as vacation destinations or landscapes near home. And ideally, the musical encounters of the MIMIC practice are co-created between the three participants, the patients, musicians, and nurses. And now I would like to ask you to click on the link to the Vimeo and review this short trailer of the MIMIC practice, please.
speelt dus aan het bed van de ziekenhuispatiënten. En vooral de improvisaties die je speciaal voor hun doet, is echt, je probeert echt via de muziek contact met hun te maken. En je krijgt vaak ook heel directe reacties daarop terug.
De focus van dit project is vooral de oudere patiënt die een operatie heeft gehad. In het UMCG zijn we met name geïnteresseerd op onze afdeling, omdat er heel ernstig zieke patiënten liggen die vaak grote operaties hebben gehad, om te kijken wat het met deze populatie patiënten doet. Maar wat we gaan vinden, hopen we dat dan heel algemeen toepasbaar is.
Er is heel vaak heel veel stress en verdriet en ook onderdrukte emoties. En soms heeft muziek dan de kracht om een soort van dat te openen en dat het gewoon, dat je het even kan laten gaan.
Je ziet mensen kalmeren, je ziet mensen dat ze een veel zachtere uitdrukking op hun gezicht krijgen. Of dat ze aangeven van dit is het beste medicijn, dat soort dingen.
Ja, als je een kamer inkomt en er is daar net muziek geweest, dan tref je een patiënt anders aan als dat ik ze 's ochtends gezien heb. En dat is, het kan van tranen zijn naar een lach die ik nog niet eerder heb gezien.
Dat brengt het mij een stuk ontspanning en een stuk buitenwereld. Je ligt hier in je kamertje, al lange tijd, op jezelf, in je ziekenhuiswereldje. En echt door de muziek komt gewoon de rest van de wereld weer binnen. Dat vind ik heel erg fijn.
Okay, I think most of you have finished seeing the film. So I'd like to continue. The musicians on this film are professional, classically trained musicians with portfolio careers. And through the work and ongoing reflective practice on their professional development in this new context of work, the musicians have learned about their interactions with the new audiences and their artistic signatures, which are fostered by the intimate musical encounters by the patient's bedsides. The research into the mimic practice found out that the musicians' approaches of person-centered music making can actually evoke small social changes in the hospital context. And it can strengthen the care relationship between nurses and patients by catalyzing new contact between them, help to create liveness in the atmosphere, in the clinical surroundings, and positively impact the patient's experiences of hospitalization. Together, these aspects are crucial for achieving compassionate, patient-centered care. But the musicians have also learned to blend into the daily structures of the ward and to cooperate with the ward staff and build ways to include them in the music making. Most importantly, the musicians have understood that the surgical hospital ward is a hectic and unpredictable working environment for live music. And this calls for strong adaptation skills and social sensitivity to read the situation of the ward. So the musicians' professional skills develop far beyond their artistic competencies of performance and ensemble playing. And they're manifested in their situational excellence that combines their artistic know-how with their contextual sensitivity. The hospital becomes a place for musicians to belong in the society and in a slowly developing community of practice with nurses. The intimacy of person-centered music making has led the mimic musicians to miss this kind of contact in their classical podium performances. The musicians' professional skills in the practice include performance skills, arrangement skills, ensemble and improvisation skills, playing by heart, communication and facilitation skills, contextual skills including understanding of privacy, safety, and interprofessional collaboration, as well as reflective capacity for continuous professional development. So being an excellent player is a prerequisite for the work, but it is not enough. By developing a situational excellence, meaning making reflexive decisions on the right kind of musical approaches in each passing musical encounter, the musicians develop a kind of a new professional expertise. And through the process, the musicians can become acknowledged members of the healthcare machinery and be recognized as cultural collaborators for achieving patient-centered care. The collected reflective journals of the mimic research revealed that the work in the hospitals helps the musicians to become better performers, also on the traditional classical podia. It deepens the contact and communication with one's audiences. And later a master thesis has been written in the classical music department of the Prince Claus Conservatoire, where a student found that working in healthcare helps with podium anxiety, creativity, and communicating with audiences, because it goes so much deeper in its meaning. So when talking about the future of classical musicians, there's a dire need for training possibilities in higher music education to work in various community contexts. Healthcare is one of them. And at this moment, we're providing education in the Prince Claus Conservatoire, also in collaboration with the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, both for physical and virtual practices in different healthcare contexts. There is also a need for an acknowledgement that musicians' artistic skills can be significantly developed outside podia in the community contexts where situational excellence can be fostered. And the field of healthcare provides also growing possibilities for employment for well-informed and well-trained musicians. In conservatoires, there's a need for an understanding that classical musicians of the 21st century can work as cultural allies for compassionate care and as partners in interprofessional collaboration in healthcare and in other contexts without losing their artistic identities. I would argue that rather it deepens and broadens it. We're currently working towards on a follow-up research pro-mimic. This means the professional excellence in meaningful music in healthcare, to further investigate the interprofessional skills and collaboration of musicians and nurses and music therapists. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Krista. It's a very interesting presentation again. And what I like is that I see the resonance between all three of the presentations in terms of the skills and expertise that musicians have to develop, basically on the stage in terms of social media, and in your case, in different social situations as the one in the hospital. Very, touching video in a way, I thought. Having said that, I see that there are some questions in the chat for also Trudy and Jane, and also for Jenny, which I overlooked previously. So I would suggest that you write your questions for Krista in the chat, and we briefly go back to questions for Jane and Trudy. And the first one is by Miranda van Drie. Do you have any experience where tutti players fulfill some of the leadership managerial tasks instead of the principals? And if so, was it successful?
Well, just to say with that, I mean, I think informally that may well be the case. But what we discovered in terms of the research that we did and what came back to us was that there was just utter lack of clarity of what the roles were. You know, what are the non-playing roles of a section musician? Where does it say? What are the non-playing roles of a principal player? Who knows? So I guess what we're saying is it may well be successful, and it may be that ultimately there is a way of reshaping an orchestral structure in order to share the sort of the workload. But we're not at that point. I mean, our research at the moment, what the gap that we saw was this huge burden placed on principal players, and we wanted to meet those needs, i.e. to sort of meet them where they are at the moment, where the problem is. And hopefully as we develop our research, we hope, it's sort of the next piece of our research, we really hope to start to gain some real clarity around what the roles really are for the 21st century, fit for a 21st century orchestral setting.
I think that we can all think of characters, wonderful people who tour in orchestras, who have a great social ability, who have ability to galvanize people together and to organize trips here, trips there when there's some free time somebody who knows good restaurants, somebody who looks out for perhaps a person who might be vulnerable or having a tough time. And those people are really wonderful and important members of the community. But I think what Trudy and I are thinking about is, how do we make sure that everybody in the organisation is given some care? How do we make sure that there aren't people who fall through the cracks? And how do we help everybody be at their best on the moment when they go on stage, so that nobody is left behind and nobody feels that they are slipping away from the standards that they need to achieve in order to be valued and important members of that ensemble. I think in many organisations now we're doing much better at taking care of people, at supporting them through the difficult times. And you know, some of this stuff might be very, very personal, but who looks after those human issues that come up in orchestras? And it does sort of fall on principals. I mean, somebody said, one of the principals said to us that you know, it feels like a big deal to talk to management about a problem somebody might be having, and so we don't do it. It only comes up when it's really gone far too far and we're beyond the point of return. And this is the sort of thing, you know, in my career, I've seen people, you know, lose their nerve, as it were, and have increased levels of anxiety. And once that starts, it can be a slippery slope. We can do much better with people. Everybody has good times and bad times, and we can do much better to support them and to be clear whose role it is. So that really is an important part of our the next stage of our research, is to bring together principals and management to say, where are the holes? Where are people falling through? Where are we not meeting the needs? And where are we not supporting people to grow and to develop? I think the final thing I'll say is that, you know, as I heard in a previous session, there's an expectation within this profession that people leave college, take up a role in an orchestra, and then they sit there and they do their job until retirement. And the notion of professional development hasn't sufficiently filtered through. Everybody, no matter where they are in their career, has something really important to give to the profession. And that will change, it will evolve. We're not static, we're not fixed, we're changing. So how can we celebrate the change and move with people and help them to feel...
Okay, I think we have lost Jane there, at least I have. Maybe this is a moment to go to 2 questions for Krista in the chat. So the first is from Nina Kumin.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Nina, for very important question about the training for improvisation. So we do first a kind of taster workshop where we explore this way of making music, and those students who feel comfortable with this approach can then follow a full course where we explore the different ways of person-centered music making, idiomatic improvisations, free improvisations, tonal improvisations, using also harmonic loops as background. So it's very different approaches that we have, and where they also then arrange their own music for trios, so 3 musicians. So they have a half a year of develop these skills in a very safe training environment, which is really crucial, because the reality of the work is that you will be confronted by a completely different reality of the hospital, and you have such social antennae. So the training is really crucial, and also for the ethics of the work, to have very well trained musicians enter this context of work.
Yeah, thanks. There's another question for you, Krista, from Diana Salazar.
Yeah.
And can you respond to that? I love the concept of situational excellence, broadening out students' skills beyond the concert hall context.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also important to understand that the artistic skills still need to be as fine as they can be, because you might be asked to play a solo Bach for somebody who is about to die, and there's moments where you can feel very vulnerable. So to be very secure in your own performance and have that kind of a strong identity as a performer. But then it is more about that social connectivity. So I think the skills on top of that are then indeed, how do I connect in that moment? How do I connect with context? And also, how can I facilitate that moment where also the care professional can feel invited? So that's where it indeed goes then further from that, building upon the artistic excellence. And this is of course about experiential learning. So learning by doing, and we're working with very experienced musicians as modeling the work. So we never send students to do this alone, of course, but be very well supported in experienced teams.
Yeah. What I like about what you said is that some musicians even would like to take these new skills back to their more traditional settings.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a moment for a very last question for Jenny, asked by Veerle Spronk. This makes me wonder how social media skills are related to how classical music performance is traditionally evaluated. We tend to separate branding from musical content, but I wonder how these skills could also play a role within the performance practice.
I think that's really a personal decision, how you choose to combine the two. A few examples could be if you want to be known for playing 19th century German clarinet sonatas, for example, then you can use social media to share your research or your research interest. Or if you want to be known for playing really high notes or very fast or very lyrical or whatever niche you choose to occupy, I think there's a way to combine your performance practice and what you're playing and what you choose to represent yourself as on social media. So I think it takes a little bit of reflection and then trying to narrow down your goals for social media and performance and then combining the two.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And we are at the end of this session. I would be tempted to go on, but that's not wise because we also need a break. You can contact the other participants, delegates in the main lobby, click on participants and you can send individual messages. But for now, I would like to thank all participants, Jane, Trudy, Jenny and Krista, for their very interesting, also very well interconnected presentations. So thanks and enjoy the rest of the conference and your break.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.